Congratulations on this film, Abe Forsythe.
Thank you very much
You
for
have
having
made
me.
a film called Down Under,
Yes.
which is a satirical comedy, or black comedy,
Yeah.
about the Cronulla riots. In your own words, describe Down Under.
Well, look, I think there's many different ways you could describe Down Under. The way that we've been sort of pitching it is about the 24 hours after the Cronulla riots, which happened over 10 years ago, and it's two cars, one from either side of the perceived fight. A car of people from the western suburbs, Middle Eastern people, and a car of people from the Shire. And the people from the Shire are protecting their territory, and the Middle Eastern car is coming in to get revenge. And it's about what happens to those cars on this night.
Why did you make this film?
At the time I wrote this film, which was 6 years ago that I wrote the first draft, I felt like we weren't really dealing with the issues of this movie, and I felt like after the riots happened, we didn't discuss. We did immediately after the riots. We were trying to work out what happened and why, but then it just seemed like it was easier to kind of forget, and we all kind of just pretended like it didn't happen, and if we don't say anything, it didn't happen.
A point of order. We weren't discussing the issues. We were discussing the issues on television, on Talkback Radio. Do you mean we weren't discussing the issues in art, in film, in TV shows?
Definitely in art and film, but I mean, immediately after the riots, yes, I do think so. But I think in the years that kind of followed, I was like, this was a pretty big thing that happened, and I kind of felt like I wasn't hearing discussion about it in society. I felt like that, we were just kind of feeling like I think we were just kind of feeling like this would go away if we didn't continue to acknowledge it.
So why did you make this film a comedy?
I think if you make something a comedy, you can use comedy to shine a light on issues and social issues like this one, and maybe get an audience to react and think about these issues in a different way. I'm also a big believer that if you can make people laugh, you're making people have an emotional response to something, and if you're having an emotional response to something, then you're more, I think, prepared to receive other things and feel something more deeply.
I will not and would ever put words in your mouth, but Paul Fennick, Housos, etc., is a very big fan of comedy as a shortcut to getting to issues, to getting to topics and so on. Firstly, are you a fan of Fennick's, and do you acknowledge that comedy can be a much more efficient way to get to a point?
Oh, completely. And I think, and look, to be what I really like about Paul Fennick is he has. There's a certain energy which he puts into all of his work. It's a very big, in-your-face, over the top, but in a really kind of brutal and very Australian way. And I feel like that's a side of comedy too, which as Australians, we've got proof that we can laugh at ourselves in that way. And look, I think this film it does operate at a similar kind of energy, but also it has a sort of darkness to it and a sadness to it, which is kind of much more present than I think probably in his work.
I have to ask you about going into a satire. Australia's reputation for satire is, in the most generous terms, very patchy.
Yes.
Sometimes it's good, quite often it's not good, and quite often it's weak by people calling themselves satirists, basically making fun of politicians, which everybody does. Mm-hmm. I'm very keen to know how wary you were about taking on a form of Australian comedy that quite often fails.
I think that's a good question. I
make the point, though, that your film does not fail. I think it's a successful example.
Well, thank you. But what I wanted to do with the comedy in this was each of these characters, in their own way, are actually kind of stereotypes. They're very big, bold, comic characters that happen to be played by actors that play the stereotype, but at the same time play the drama and the reality behind that stereotype. So there's a kind of balance going on between the two of them. And what I really wanted to do was, when we use comedy in this movie, it's to try and further your understanding of these characters and their behaviour. So as a result of which, because of the subject matter, that then meant it was a satire. It wasn't like I want to make satirical points about this issue. It was more like, I just want to explore these characters. And all the reasons that people found themselves there on that day, each of these characters kind of represent different parts of that.
You really did inject balance in the characters. The main thug, played by Damon Herriman, who is overdue for like some major recognition. The guy is a brilliant character actor.
Yeah, he really is.
He starts off as being the stereotypical thug, but then you get into his home life, and he's an expectant father. He cares for his partner. Same with the guys on the other team.
Yeah.
One guy just wants to study. He's not interested in the violence. So it's a very intelligent leavening of the stereotypes with actual drama. I want to know how conscious you were of doing that to make sure that it wasn't just a disposable piss take on what happened.
Well, look, totally. It was so important for me that it was a film that was balanced. And if we're going to bring something into the movie, you want to make sure that everything's present, but something's not pushed ahead of anything else. It was a matter of people being able to go in and recognize that there's so many different parts of this story that fed into that day. And then that's when you get an actor like Damon Herriman. He's the perfect example because I love every single person in this cast, and I couldn't be happier with the cast. But like, I will go out and say that like Damon Herriman is and always has been my favorite actor in the world, and that's because he can navigate the different parts of a character in that he can be funny. He can, his character has a whole lot of issues going on in his own life, which is forcing him to get behind the racism of this movie and kind of use that as an excuse to behave in a really bad way. That then he can go into that bad behavior and actually be terrifying. But then similarly, he can flip out and you can see moments of sort of empathy with him, with his own family too. So it's a very complicated performance, which is made truthful by an actor of that caliber. And there's very few actors in the world that I think are at that level, but I feel like this cast is actually filled with them.
Now, I know that you refer to this as your second feature film. Mm-hmm. I prefer to refer to Ned, your first feature film, as your student movie.
Yeah,
and this as your first actual feature film. I do need to commend you on the quality of your direction, not just in the dramatic scenes, but also your ability to cut funny. It's very hard for directors to cut funny, and of course it's essential in a comedy.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest laughs in the film are from your cuts. Now, I think it's a successful and intelligent satire, and without wanting you to think that this is a gotcha question, because it's not, mm-hmm. I also just want to ask you about the level of care you took with the portrayal of the Muslim characters.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'm presuming that you were careful not to cross certain lines that a satire could cross legitimately.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me a bit about that?
Well, look, I mean, so obviously dealing with this sort of subject matter, you can potentially open yourself up to all sorts of issues and all sorts of problems that aren't actually relevant to this particular story. So for me, it was about, for a start, making sure I knew what the story was. Then it was about me actually trying to get more of an understanding of that side of things and that culture. So that was, there was a lot of research done into that. And it was also about being sure that I kind of acknowledge that side of things, but then also go, but it's not about this. Right. But I also needed to acknowledge it in a way that showed that as a filmmaker and everyone that worked on this, that we all understood it. And a lot of that came down to the people that we cast too, in that every single Middle Eastern actor in this movie, they all have that particular heritage as humans. And I didn't want to cast, even though we saw all sorts of actors, I didn't want to cast an Italian or a Greek person in those roles and have them play that side of a culture that they're not part of. Because it was just as important for me that each of these actors could stand behind this movie the same way that I could. Because, to be honest, they've probably got a lot more at stake if they can't, or if they, offend anyone in that way. So,
I mean, just add one devil's advocate question, underline devil's advocate question, is that it's possible people might criticise Down Under for not going harder on the Muslim side.
Yeah, sure.
That of all the religions in the world, and this is pretty obvious, the one religion that's causing trouble, violence, murder, is the Islamic faith. And some people might criticise the film for not going harder on them. What do you say?
Well, two things. I mean, one is this is not a documentary. This is a fictional film and fictional characters. And another thing too is what's happening around the world at the moment is, horrible in all sorts of ways. And this is a film which is based on a story that happened over 10 years ago. And it's more about the people that found themselves there on the day versus any of the other sort of stuff that's been going on. So yeah, that's and look, there's all sorts of other areas that people will go, well, why didn't you go harder on this, or why didn't you go harder on that? And that again comes back to this film had to be balanced, and it touches on lots of things, acknowledges lots of things, but at the end of the day, it's not about one thing in particular, other than maybe arguably ignorance does nothing but breed other ignorance.
Do you want the film to divide audiences?
No.
What do you want it to do?
Well, I want it to give us all a safe space, no matter where we are, who we come from, who we think we are, to be able to just go and actually have a moment and step back and maybe just have a laugh and be able to think about these issues in a different way and then be able to process them in a different way. And maybe if we can process them in a different way, that will help us understand them and think about something through other people's points of view.
You want this to inform a conversation.
Yeah.
Not a shrill shouting match, but a conversation.
No, and it's so, everything just devolves to people shouting at each other. I don't know if, obviously it's what happened on, 10 years ago at the riots. We see all the footage of the movie, but I don't know what's happened. Like it's so much of it probably has to do with social media and how we can interact behind like a kind of like we feel like we're behind this wall of like which we're safe, so we can say whatever we want. And I'm being, for the first time, I'm being abused like on social media by all sorts of people for having made this film. And incidentally, these are people that are abusing me before they've seen the movie and kind of understand what it's actually about.
That's a prerequisite to online abuse. To be completely ill-informed,
totally.
that by now.
Yeah, completely.
Now, mate, I've seen some of the images for the marketing of the film. I'm not seeing billboards all over the place. Can you just please tell me? It's my ongoing gripe with Australian movies. These wonderful films come out. The public doesn't know that they're there. Tell me about it, please, because those images are great. Yeah, look,
my producer and I, we actually got involved an agency, a creative agency called The Monkeys, and The Monkeys are one of our most, if not most in-demand local advertising agency. And the reason we got them involved was they saw the film and just loved it. And, it spoke to them about the issue that the movie is about. And then I was talking to one of them and we were talking about how no Australian movie has ever utilised an advertising agency before in selling a movie, which seems crazy because that's their specialty is bringing a product to an audience.
Crazy.
Yeah,
it is crazy.
So the Monkeys did pro bono. They did this incredible marketing campaign for us, which unfortunately we don't have enough money to get out there because it's a numbers game, distribution, distributing movies in Australia, and unfortunately we kind of can't compete. So there is some stuff going out there, but it's very selective and it's being targeted at areas that are playing the movie.
That's very upsetting.
No, I know it is, and like I'm in a situation too where it's sort of. I feel like we've learnt from the mistakes of other films that I thought were really good and kind of like dropped by the wayside. And I'm really determined for this movie not to happen. And we're releasing it at a time which is, frighteningly relevant and was never intended. We never intended this movie to be released in the kind of climate that's out there at the moment.
Yeah.
But all the more reason that I feel like this marketing campaign and those posters that you're talking about, it needs to be seen because the message of the movie is we're all on the same side and we're all in this together. You
start off with showing footage of the riots and it's pretty sobering stuff. Can you just quickly tell us how you first reacted when you saw the footage? I know you were in England at the time.
Yeah, that's right.
How'd you react?
Well, look, when I first saw the footage 10 years ago, I was just completely horrified. It was one of the most sickening and just strange things for me at the time too, because I was living in London and seeing it all from the media, how they were reporting it overseas, and so very weird to feel homesick, but at the same time be looking at images of home and going, is that where I come from? Is that, and how do I fit into that? And have I, by proxy been, involved in any of this behaviour? Like, because you can keep quiet about this sort of stuff, but I think by keeping quiet, in some ways you're guilty by association. You may not be out there sort of saying or spreading any of the ignorant behaviour, but I think we've got a duty, if we can, in some way, to kind of call out ignorance and try and sort of cut it off.
Now, are you ready for the Shembri challenge?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, here it is. I'm a big shot American studio suit. Lots of money, lots of pull, lots of muscle. I've seen your wonderful little film about racism in Australia. Some riots, something happened.
Yeah.
Mate, love the movie. Want to give you a deal. Want to put this thing out in the States. Give it a really good exhibition. A lot of exposure. Want to put you on some talk shows. We'll give you the circuit. And so really, really would like to pick up your film and release it in America. Just want you to change the ending. We want an up ending because you end the film quite bleakly. So we'll give you this deal on condition that you change the ending and give us an up ending. What do you reckon?
Look, this is obviously a hypothetical situation, but this movie can't exist in the world without that ending, and if it means saying goodbye to it being released on a massive scale.
We're going to put it out on like 2,000 screens.
Oh, yeah. But if this went out on 2,000 screens without that ending, it would be an incredibly responsible thing for me to do as a filmmaker and as a human being, because the ending is the movie. And I don't think people, I know people don't expect that the ending goes quite where this movie does go, but ultimately, if you're making a film like this one and making the statement that this film makes, you can't deal with this subject matter without showing it for how brutally awful it actually is.
We'll make you famous, mate. You'll get.
I don't want to be famous for the wrong reasons. Yeah. I would rather slip back into whatever anonymity that means than being someone that makes something irresponsible.